The sun blazed high over the open-air event as a warm wind rustled through the banners strung across the perimeter, each one emblazoned with bold red, white, and blue. People had gathered from all corners. Some came in pickup trucks with American flags flying defiantly from the beds. Others arrived in caravans of cars decorated with slogans that shimmered under the mid-afternoon sun like battle cries. The crowd pulsed with anticipation, a steady thrum of voices rising and falling, like waves crashing along a restless coastline. They clutched signs, hats, bottled water, and truth, or at least the desperate thirst for it, clinging to hope like it was the last match in a dark room. Karoline Leavitt stood behind the stage curtain, still, her eyes closed for one fleeting moment of calm. Her heart pounded, not from nerves, but from something deeper, something burning. There was something in her chest, a fire fed by frustration, by months of headlines that distorted, twisted, and defamed. She breathed in and out, once, slowly, her hands gripping the edges of the podium out of sight, anchoring herself. She wasn't here for applause or vanity. She was here for war. When the MC finally called her name, the crowd rose in one sweeping motion, their cheers erupting like the shattering of a long-held silence. Karoline stepped out into the light, her hair catching the sun, her silhouette framed by the flags fluttering behind her. The moment she took the mic, the cheers did not wane but only intensified, a rising tide of voices echoing off the metal rafters and out across the fields. She didn't smile at first. Her jaw was set, her shoulders square. Her gaze swept the crowd, not seeking approval but connection. She wasn't speaking to them. She was speaking with them, as if each word she'd soon unleash had been forged in the same fires they'd all endured. She waited. The noise faded, like thunder rolling away into the horizon, and then silence, expectant and heavy. "I am done," she began, her voice strong, unwavering, slicing clean through the silence. "I am done letting them lie." The first sentence landed like a strike of lightning. Murmurs ran through the crowd, affirmations, fists in the air, people leaning forward. She continued, not with rage, but with ice-cold precision, her tone like a scalpel cutting through propaganda. She spoke of the headlines, how they painted her as extreme, as unhinged, as a mouthpiece for something cruel. But she gave them names, dates, receipts. She recited lies with the mechanical accuracy of someone who'd memorized every syllable, every insult. Then she tore them apart. "They said I hate the poor," she said, eyes scanning left to right, her voice growing. "But they never mentioned that I grew up on food stamps. They never mentioned that my father broke his back working double shifts so I could go to school. They erased my story, because the truth doesn't fit their narrative." There was a flash in the eyes of those listening. That kind of flash, the flicker of memory, of shared pain. People nodded slowly. Some yelled out, others just clenched, their fists against their chests. Karoline didn't pause. "They called me dangerous," she said, her voice rising now, lifting like the wind before a storm. "But who is really dangerous? A girl who speaks her mind? Or a media machine that poisons every truth, that manipulates every story, that paints anyone who dares to defy their order as evil?" The cheers came again, louder this time, no longer polite applause, but raw, emotional eruptions. The people weren't clapping. They were howling, like something inside them had been named and finally, shouted back into the world. Karoline leaned in, her hand tight around the mic, her eyes alive. "They lied about you, too," she said, nearly whispering now. But the hush that fell made her whisper louder than any scream. "They made you feel crazy. They made you feel alone. But look around. You are not alone anymore." A woman in the front row broke into tears. A man beside her clapped with hands trembling. A teenager in the back raised a homemade sign. Words, scrawled in black marker, "We see through the lies." The energy was no longer just excitement. It was release, the kind that comes when chains start to rattle loose. Karoline gripped the edges of the podium again, this time not to steady herself, but to lean in. Her voice turned sharp, like flint on steel. "The truth is not a weapon, they treat it like one because they fear it," she said, her tone fierce, her conviction unshakable. "But I'm not afraid of them, and after today, neither should you be." A roar exploded from the crowd, unrestrained, a wall of noise so deafening it felt like the earth itself shifted. People stood on chairs, some with tears streaming down their cheeks, others with mouths wide in cathartic fury. The air was thick with dust, sound, and emotion. A perfect storm gathered under the American sky, and Karoline stood in the middle of it, unbroken, fire in her eyes, ready for whatever would come next. She let the storm wash over her, standing still at the center, her chest rising and falling with the rhythm of it. She wasn't smiling, not yet. There was no triumph in this moment, only truth. She raised her hand slightly, palm outward, and the crowd began to settle again, voices dimming into a heavy silence. They leaned in. Her voice returned, quieter, now, but each word struck with even greater force, as though it had been hammered in the forge of every betrayal she'd endured. "I watched them smear mothers who spoke out at school board meetings," she said, and the sound of murmurs returned, angry, aching. "They called them domestic terrorists, mothers, women who just wanted to know what their children were being taught. That is the country they are building, one where truth is hate and silence is virtue." She shifted her weight slightly, glancing toward the edge of the stage where two young women held hands, nodding through tears. "They tell you to sit down. They say, 'Trust us, we know better.' But what they mean is, shut up and obey. And I won't do that. Not now. Not ever." Her voice cracked just once, but it wasn't weakness. It was weight. Real weight. The kind that carried years of being dismissed, mocked, misrepresented. The crowd didn't waver. They held her. And in turn, she held them. "I've been called every name you can think of," she continued, her voice rising again, regaining its steel. "Extremist. Puppet. Election denier. Do you know what I call myself?" She paused, let it sit. "American. That's it. That's the only label I care about." Thunder from the audience. Hands slapped together, voices lifted. Somewhere, someone yelled, "Tell it!" and others echoed it back. The call became a rhythm, pulsing through the crowd like a drum beat. "Tell it! Tell it! Tell it!" Karoline's eyes lit up. This wasn't politics. This was confession. This was reckoning. "They call us conspiracy theorists," she said, louder now, almost laughing from disbelief. "But they were the ones who told us the laptop was fake. They told us masks stopped transmission. They told us inflation was temporary. They told us the border was secure. They looked us in the eye and lied to our faces. And then they told us we were the crazy ones for noticing." A man in a faded veteran's cap wiped his eyes. A woman with a baby on her hip shouted something unintelligible, her face red with emotion, her free arm pumping into the sky. The baby cried, but even that sound felt like part of the storm. Karoline kept going, voice unwavering, fists clenched at her sides. "They hate you for questioning them," she said. "Because the moment you question them, they lose control. And what is the media now, if not just a tool for control? They don't inform, they indoctrinate. They don't report, they manipulate." There were no more silent nods. Now every face was alive. Some red with anger, some glowing with recognition, some stunned, blinking in a kind of disbelief, as if they hadn't realized until now how deep the lies ran, how many times they had been bent and bruised by invisible hands. Karoline leaned in again, lowering her voice like a secret between friends. "I'm not afraid of their headlines," she said. "I'm not afraid of being fact-checked by people who think biology is a debate. I'm not afraid of losing favor in their eyes because I never had it to begin with. I earned nothing from them, and I owe them nothing." She took a single step back from the podium, her breath shallow but steady, her gaze distant for a moment, like she was seeing not just this crowd, but every town, every living room, every family watching from home. But I owe you, she said. Finally, a tremor in her voice that didn't break her, only made her more human. I owe you the truth, and I will spend every breath I have telling it, even if it costs me everything. The crowd broke again, not in chaos, but in unity. Cheers rose. Cries of thank you spilled from dozens of lips. Flags were lifted high. Somewhere, a man dropped to one knee, overwhelmed. Others knelt beside him, not in worship, but in prayer. The kind of prayer that isn't about salvation, but survival. The kind that says, we are still here, we still matter. And Karoline stood, there, sweat shining on her brow, jaw clenched, spine straight as a blade. She had never looked more alive. As the crowd's cries slowly melted into a steady hum, Karoline stepped forward again, the boards beneath her boots creaking with purpose. Her gaze swept across the sea of faces, young, old, sunburned, and tear-streaked, fists high and hearts exposed. She saw them all. She felt them. And in that shared gaze, something unspoken passed between speaker and listener. A vow, silent and solemn. They don't just want to silence us, she said, voice steady, slow, each syllable carved, like stone. They want to erase us. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded with quiet fury. Others stood still, eyes wide, as if hearing their own story spoken aloud for the first time. They want to erase our values, our history, our faith, our voices. They call it progress. They call it justice. But what is it really? Her voice sharpened. It's power. It's control. It's domination dressed up in hashtags and headlines. She paused, drawing a slow breath, her chest rising, like a swell before a storm surge. I've sat across from the reporters, she said. They smile, they nod, they pretend to listen. But their pens were poisoned before I ever opened my mouth. The story was already written. I was already guilty. All they needed was a quote to pin the noose. There was an audible gasp, not just from the boldness of her words, but from the unmistakable truth in them. People had seen it. They had lived it. Not just in interviews and news clips, but in classrooms, boardrooms, churches, and sidewalks. Judgment without trial. Labels without evidence. They call that journalism, she said, shaking her head, a bitter smile curling at the edge of her lips. But I call it betrayal. Someone near the front shouted, Amen! And dozens echoed it. The rhythm was returning, call and response, speaker and people, pain and defiance, wound and weapon. She turned slightly, pointing out toward the field, the cameras, the blinking red eyes of the media towers stationed like silent sentinels along the edges. You're watching, aren't you? She said, eyes fixed not on the people but the lenses. You'll chop this up. You'll take 6 seconds out of context and call it rage. You'll find a still shot where I look angry and tell the world I'm dangerous. The crowd roared, with laughter. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Too familiar. Well, go ahead, she snapped. Do it. Take your sound bites. But I know what I said. They know what I said. And you can't bury it anymore. You can't bury us anymore. The fire had returned to her voice, no longer smoldering but burning clean and wild. We're not going back into silence. We're not going back into shame. You pushed us, mocked us, lied to us, canceled us. And we survived. The sun shifted above, casting her in a slant of golden light. Her eyes shimmered. The wind tugged at her hair. And still, her voice pressed, forward like a blade through fog. You want to call that radical, she said? Fine. Then I'll wear that word like armor. Because if standing up for my country, for my God, for my family, if that makes me a radical, then so be it. Now the crowd was no longer cheering. They were chanting, over and over, the same word, USA, USA, USA. It echoed through the field, bouncing off trees and camera towers, carrying across hills and back again, a chorus of raw, thundering love for something that felt more like memory than reality. A country slipping away and a cry to bring it back. Karoline let them chant. She She stood there, absorbing it, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest. And when it quieted, just enough, she raised her voice once more. "They don't hate me because I'm wrong," she said, soft but cutting. "They hate me because I'm right, because I won't back down, because I refuse to bow." Another wave of cheers. Flags waved high. Someone fired off a streamer from the back. Red and white ribbons exploded into the air and drifted down like confetti at a long overdue celebration. "They want you to forget who you are," she said, now pacing the edge of the stage, her voice fierce and intimate, like she was speaking, to each soul one-on-one. "They want you ashamed of your roots, ashamed of your faith, ashamed of your skin, your ancestors, your voice. But let me tell you something they'll never print. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Hands flew to mouths. Some people cried openly now, not from sadness, but from the release of years of tension, lies, fear. This was something deeper than politics. It was the unclenching of a nation's heart. "And the more they try to shame you," she said, pausing in the center of the stage, "the more you must stand taller, louder, prouder." The final word struck like a hammer. The crowd didn't just cheer. They screamed, and Karoline Leavitt, eyes fierce, soul on fire, let them. The scream of the crowd poured into the sky like smoke from a long dormant fire, finally set ablaze. It was primal, cathartic, a sound that didn't ask permission. Karoline stood in the middle of it, her chest rising with every breath, as if inhaling the hope that now charged the very air. She didn't flinch, didn't fluster. Her voice cut through the chaos like thunder chasing lightning. "I have been called a threat," she said, steady and slow, her tone now like a story passed between generations. "Not because I broke the law, not because I incited violence, but because I refused to recite their script, because I dared to believe in the people instead of the elites." The silence that fell was thick with recognition. Heads tilted forward, arms folded across hearts. A boy on his father's shoulders clenched a miniature flag in both fists, waving it slowly like a banner at the top of a mountain. None of them were willing to leave behind. Karoline's words deepened, darkened, the timbre of a soul that had stared down ridicule and come out the other side stronger. "They tried to break me," she said, not as a victim, but as someone who had faced a quiet war in the dead of night, with headlines, with shadow bans, with smears written by cowards who never looked me in the eye. She looked out beyond the crowd then, to where the sun dipped lower toward the horizon, the gold bleeding into deep orange. Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "But you can't cancel someone who doesn't ask for their approval." And then, like an arrow knocked and loosed from the center of her chest, she stood tall again and let the words fly. "They don't own us anymore." Gasps, shouts, cheers. The truth of it settled in the marrow of the people listening, like something remembered from a dream they were told to forget. Karoline raised her hand high, not to silence, not to command, but to lift. And the people lifted with her. "We're not begging for permission," she said. "We're taking back what was ours, our dignity, our speech, our country." She turned, pointing now to the children scattered among the crowd, young girls in oversized shirts, young boys with flags painted on their cheeks. "We are not doing this for clout. We're not doing it for claps. We're doing it for them. For their future. Because I will not hand them a world run by tyrants disguised as journalists." A wave of emotion rippled through the crowd like a tsunami. Parents pulled children close. Grandfathers removed their caps. A mother somewhere sobbed into her hands, shaking her head slowly as if the weight of it all was finally cracking her open. Karoline didn't cry, but her eyes shimmered with held-back fire. "You want to know what courage looks like?" she asked. "It's not standing on a stage. It's the truck driver who gets up before dawn to feed a family that the government forgot. It's the single mom who teaches her kids truth when the schools teach them lies. It's the veteran who stands alone at the back of a town hall and says, 'No more.'" A few moments of silence followed, not out of confusion, but out of reverence. The kind of silence that feels like a prayer shared among thousands. "And I will not stop speaking for them," she continued. "Even when they threaten, even when they twist my words, even when they try to make me afraid." She turned toward the media cameras again, her voice aimed like a bullet through glass. "I am not afraid of you." There it was. The line. The defiance. Not petty, not performative, but real. Raw. Righteous. "You can mock me," she said. "You can slander me, you can ban me, but I know who I am and I know what this country is supposed to be." Again the crowd surged, not with noise but with movement. People didn't just cheer, they stood. Those who had been seated now rose. Those who had been quiet now shouted. They claimed their space with the full force of their bodies and voices. Karoline walked the edge of the stage slowly now, absorbing every face, every tear, every raised fist, and then she said something that landed like scripture in the wind. "They underestimated us." The words hung there, undeniable, true in a way that couldn't be explained with logic, only felt in the chest, in the gut, in the blood. "They thought we would stay home," she said, pacing. "They thought we would shut up. They thought we would get tired, worn down, ashamed." She turned back to the center of the stage. They were wrong. The cheers this time were deafening. People jumped, screamed, hugged each other. One man dropped to his knees, arms raised to the sky like he was baptizing himself in the truth of it. Karoline stood at the edge of the stage, arms open now, not as a performer, but as a vessel. The people didn't worship her. They joined her. Like soldiers who had finally found their general, not because she commanded them, but because she saw them. She looked skyward, then back at the crowd. The wind tugged at the corners of the flags behind her. The light turned softer. And with the strength of someone who had weathered 1,000 storms, she said, "We are the resistance. And they can. No longer pretend we don't exist." The ground beneath them didn't shake, but something inside them did. Something old, something free, something ready. The light was slipping low behind the trees now, casting long shadows that stretched across the field like fingers of the past, reaching, grasping, but unable to hold, onto what was being reborn in that very moment. Karoline stood still, allowing the silence to wrap around her like a second skin, the hush that comes not from emptiness, but from awe. She could feel it vibrating under her boots, not just the earth, but the hearts, thousands of them, pounding in time with hers. "I want you to remember this night," she said quietly, her voice carrying without effort, "because this is where it begins." No one spoke, no one dared. It wasn't performance, it was prophecy. The wind picked up again, lifting her hair behind her like a flame refusing to die out. She didn't look like a politician anymore. She looked like a storm wrapped in sunlight, a force shaped by betrayal and forged in conviction. "They said we were finished," she continued, voice rising again like a tide refusing to retreat. "They said we had no chance, that we were outnumbered, outspent, outcast." She stepped forward, but they forgot something, a pause. They forgot what happens when you try to bury people who remember how to fight. The eruption that followed didn't feel like cheering. It felt like a dam breaking. It felt like years of being unheard, unseen, ridiculed, finally being answered. People clutched each other, not just out of joy, but relief. The truth wasn't just being spoken, it was being unleashed. Karoline's voice soared above the noise, clear and cutting. They thought you'd be too scared to speak, too tired to stand, too broken to believe. She scanned the crowd, her eyes resting on one man, an amputee in a military jacket with a tattered flag patch on his sleeve. His hand trembled, but he saluted her. Karoline's jaw tightened, and her voice came back with the kind of strength that only reverence can bring. "But you're still here." She looked at the young woman clutching a Bible, the couple holding a baby swaddled in stars and stripes, the teenager wearing a t-shirt with her name scribbled in Sharpie. "You never left." Now she was almost shouting, not with anger, but with something that felt more ancient. "You stayed through the lies, through the isolation, through the mandates, through the censorship. You stayed when they told you to be ashamed. You stayed when they tried to erase your faith, your roots, your rights." The air felt alive with electricity. Every syllable sparked against the crowd's skin like fire against tinder. Do you know what that makes you? Another pause. Every breath held. It makes you the remnant, the ones who remain, the ones who rise. Somewhere near the back, a man began to sob, not from sadness, but from release, like a weight he'd carried in silence had finally been named aloud. Karoline's voice grew softer, more intimate now, and somehow even more powerful. I don't care what they say about me tomorrow. I don't care what headline they twist. I don't care what clip they edit. Because they didn't hear your cheers. They didn't see your tears. They didn't feel this. She spread her arms wide, taking it all in. They will lie tomorrow. But they cannot unlive this night. They cannot undo this voice. And they cannot unsee this movement. A woman near the front collapsed to her knees, head bowed, her hands clasped in prayer. Others joined her. The field became a tapestry of people, some kneeling, some standing, all locked in a moment too sacred for time to steal. Karoline stepped back toward the center of the stage, and when she spoke again, it was as if she was whispering into every ear, placing a flame in every chest. They will try to divide us, she said. They will tell you we are too different to be united. But they're wrong, because what binds us is greater than what breaks us. She looked up to the darkening sky. A single star appeared above the tree line, like the first eye opening. After a long night, we are bound by truth, and truth does not bend to fear. The crowd stood, heads lifted toward that star, hands rising slowly like a forest blooming under moonlight. Karoline's voice dropped to a final hush. We are bound by country, and this country will not fall under our watch. Then, silence. Not a single shout, not a single whisper. Only the shared knowledge, carried between them like a sacred vow, that everything had changed. Not just for her, but for them all. And in the dark, as the sky deepened and the cameras clicked and the wind whispered across the grass, Karoline Leavitt stood on that stage, not as a speaker, not as a candidate, but as a sentinel. And the people, every last one of them, stood with her. The night had fully descended now, wrapping the field in a velvet hush, pierced only by the distant hum of floodlights and the murmuring breaths of thousands who were still rooted in place, not by command, but by connection. The sky above them had turned deep indigo, stars now scattered like whispers of eternity, each one glinting over a sea of upturned faces. Karoline remained at the podium, motionless for a moment, as if listening to something only she could hear. Then, she stepped forward one last time, her boots echoing on the wood, her hands loose at her sides, her gaze softer but no less fierce. "You've heard the truth," she said, voice low but still striking through the night like bells in the distance. "You've lived it, and now you have a choice." A wind swept through the field, rustling signs and flags, tugging at jackets and hair like a ghost passing through the crowd. No one moved, not out of fear, but out of reverence. "You can go home and wait for the next lie," she said, her voice almost mournful. "Wait for them to tell you who to hate next, who to blame next, who to be afraid of next." She looked down for a moment, her lashes shadowing her eyes, and when she looked back up, it was with something almost holy. "Or you can rise." The word shattered the stillness. It didn't scream. It called. You can look your neighbor in the eye and say, "We don't have to be afraid anymore." You can speak the truth at your dinner table, at your workplace, at your school board, even if your voice shakes. You can vote with clarity. You can act with courage. You can fight, back with faith. The murmuring began again. Not noise, but breath. Hope. A collective inhalation of what was possible. "And when they come for you with names and slurs and silence," she continued, each word crisp, "you'll remember tonight. You'll remember. This sound?" She paused. The crowd erupted. A flood of voices surged into the air, no longer raw and desperate, but full, like a chorus of thunder rising to meet the storm. There were no instructions, no leader calling for the chant. The people simply knew. We are the truth. We are the truth. We are the truth. over and over, their voices layered on top of one another, defying the quiet night with something far louder than sound: conviction. Karoline watched them with eyes rimmed red, but she didn't cry. There was no time for tears when the world was burning and your hands held the water. "I don't know what tomorrow brings," she said when the chant finally softened, "but I know what you bring. You bring strength. You bring light. You bring America. Not the one they sell you, but the one we all remember. The one we're taking back, inch by inch, word by word, heart by heart." She stepped away from the podium and moved to the very edge of the stage. "I'm not going to save you," she said gently. "You're going to save each other." Then she raised her hand, just one, and held it high over her head, palm open to the heavens. A signal, a symbol, a promise. One by one, people followed, arms lifted, palms opened, 1,000 hands raised to the sky. Not clenched in fists, but open, honest, unafraid. The music began, soft at first, an instrumental swelling from the speakers. Not the thrum of a campaign anthem or a stadium roar, but something more sacred, almost a hymn, almost a memory. And slowly, as the notes rose into the night, the people began to sing. Not everyone at once, but one here, another there. Some voices cracked, some shook, but together they formed something beautiful, something unplanned and unstoppable. "Oh, say can you see," the national anthem, rising from their throats like a prayer long forgotten. Karoline didn't sing. She stood in silence, lips pressed together, a hand over her heart, her eyes scanning the crowd as the words built around her, carrying more weight than they ever had in a stadium or a commercial or a 4th of July parade. This wasn't performance. This was reclamation. When the final notes fell away into the dark, no one spoke. No one moved. It felt like the end of something sacred and the beginning of something far greater. Karoline lowered her hand. "Now go," she said softly, "and be the fire they tried to put out." With that, she stepped back from the stage and disappeared behind the curtain, not chased by cameras or handlers or flashing lights. Just the echo of her words ringing out into the night, carried on, the backs of those who now knew, without a shadow of doubt, that they were not alone. They were awakened, and the silence that followed was not quiet. It was thunder waiting to strike.